Good afternoon. I'm Terrence Jewell, and I'll be giving a presentation on financial management, budgeting, and analysis. Let's start with overarching financial management goals and functions, particularly as they pertain to the capital budgeting process. Financial goals, which can vary some depending on the academic or professional setting you find yourself in, should at least include these ones to highlight the importance of responsible management of the company's capital in order to increase the value of the company and to maximize shareholder wealth while reducing risk where possible. One key goal you see there is finalizing capital budgeting projects in order to select the most prudent projects for the company to increase their value. Here are some important functions of financial management that will help the company meet their financial goals during the capital budgeting process. Since budgeting is the planned spending of the company's capital, it goes hand in hand with forecasting. Here are some of the items that are analyzed and generated to budget and forecast as accurately as possible. For example, generating pro forma statements and capital budgeting. A big ticket function of financial management is analyzing capital projects. Although there are several methods to do so, analyzing net present value and/or internal rate of return are two of the more widely used methods to calculate a capital project's output for the company. Finally, a sensitivity analysis is an important function that we will cover more in detail later. Now, let's move on to discussing some of the financial management methods used during capital budgeting analysis. First, let's look at some of the internal finance actions taken. One thorough calculation to begin analyzing the projected costs of a project is the weighted average cost of capital, or WACC. This helps determine costs and risks associated with raising capital through debt or shareholder equity for a project. Another action is using one or several methods to calculate a project's value over time. Payback period and discounted payback period are simpler. However, net present value and internal rate of return are usually preferred in order to show a better picture of the project's outcome to shareholders. Finally, a company will conduct sensitivity analysis to ensure they do not spend too much time or resources on project drivers that have negligible effects on things like the net present value and internal rate of return. In order to create an even more accurate picture of a capital project in current market conditions, a company will do several things. First, a main action will be to use the capital asset pricing model, or CAPM, to calculate a project's risks and returns in the market environment. An alternative to the CAPM is the dividend discount model, used to calculate expected risks and returns of a capital project while also considering dividend payments to its shareholders. Other important external financial factors that need to be considered are interest rates and income tax implications. Capital budgeting and project analysis need to be calculated against the risks that exist in its business environment. Once the risks are identified, financial managers can then work on integration actions. There are many ways to calculate and analyze risk to a capital project, but for today's purpose, we will concentrate on these three. First, it is important to calculate CAPM to determine a project's risk premium. Then, company management and/or company policy can help make informed risk decisions. Finally, the sensitivity analysis will help focus time and resources on the critical project drivers to bring a project to fruition while integrating risks as much as possible. Finally, we are going to drill down into the sensitivity analysis and how it plays an important part of the capital budgeting process. As with any decision, you need to evaluate the quality of it. In capital budgeting, company decision makers will measure a project's ability to move forward by looking at potential qualitative drivers of costs and benefits. During the qualitative review, it is often company policy or upper management who will set the sensitivity thresholds for projects, which will usually consider things like the market environment, stakeholder expectations, and acceptable accuracy levels for information inputs. Once a capital project makes the qualitative sensitivity cut, financial managers can begin working on the quantitative sensitivity variables. One of the first steps in this part of the analysis is to generate a good base case to use as a starting reference point for the current project to identify some common variables that should be calculated, like net income, for example. Once a base case is established, it is important to determine the variables ranges to be calculated for the analysis. Then, the analysis can calculate how large of an impact adjusting just one variable will have on a project's outcome. Finally, a list can be created to help focus the appropriate time and resources on the different variables. So in conclusion, we covered financial management goals and functions as they pertain to the capital budgeting process. And under the capital budgeting process, we looked at some of the internal and external methods used to integrate risk properly. And then finally, we wrapped up with the sensitivity analysis and looked at some of the qualitative and quantitative steps taken. Thank you for your time and attention today. Here are my references.